There are roads that locals avoid after dark, not because they're dangerous, not because of accidents, but because people who drive them sometimes come back different. This story was sent to me by a truck driver from the Midwest. He asked that I change the names but keep everything else exactly as it happened. He said if anyone watching ever sees mile markers counting down to 0 on an empty highway in the middle of nowhere, don't keep driving. My name is Ryan, and in November 2024 I worked as an overnight delivery driver. I had been on the road for almost 10 hours and was desperate to get home. My GPS suggested a shortcut through an old 2-lane highway that would save nearly 45 minutes. When I mentioned the route to the warehouse manager, he paused for a second. Then he said, "Take the interstate instead." I laughed. "Why, bad road?" He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he shrugged. People get lost out there. I assumed he meant there was no cell service. I wish that was all he meant. At 1:42 a.m., I turned onto Highway 47. Within minutes, civilization disappeared. No gas stations, no houses, no streetlights, just darkness stretching beyond my headlights. The silence inside the truck became almost unbearable. Even the engine seemed quieter. It felt like the road itself was swallowing sound. About 20 minutes later, I noticed the first mile marker. 20. Nothing strange. Then came 19, then 18. I figured the numbers marked the distance to a nearby town, but after marker 12 I realized something. I hadn't passed a single intersection. There was nowhere the road could be leading. The radio suddenly filled with static. A voice barely audible whispered, "Turn around." I hit the scan button. Every station was static. The whisper repeated, slower this time, "Turn around." I shut the radio off. The silence was somehow worse. Marker 10 appeared. Standing beside it was an old man. He wore faded overalls and a dirty hat. His face was hidden. He stood completely still. I assumed he needed help. I slowed down. Then he slowly raised one hand, not waving, pointing toward the road behind me. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I drove past him. 2 minutes later, marker 9 appeared. The same old man stood beside it. Exactly the same posture, exactly the same clothes, exactly the same raised finger. There was no way he could have gotten there. I checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. By marker 8, panic had started to set in. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The truck climbed to nearly 100 kilometers per hour. Then I saw movement in the side mirror. Someone was running beside the truck, keeping pace effortlessly. I turned my head. Nothing. Back to the mirror. There it was again. Long arms, impossible speed, always staying just outside the headlights. Then it vanished. A loud bang shook the cargo area. Another, then another. It sounded like someone was hitting the back doors with enormous force. I refused to stop. Marker 6. A police cruiser blocked half the road. Its emergency lights flashed silently. The driver's door hung open. No officer, no footprints, no signs of a crash. Only an old radio sitting on the hood. As I drove past, it crackled to life. A man's frightened voice came through. "If you hear this, don't stop for anyone." Then the transmission ended. The cruiser disappeared in my mirrors, as if it had never been there. Marker 5. The truck suddenly felt heavier. The suspension dipped. Like someone had climbed inside. I looked toward the passenger seat. Empty. Then I noticed muddy footprints. One, then another, appearing on the floor mat. No person, just wet footprints forming one after another, walking toward me. The final footprint stopped inches from the driver's seat. Something invisible was standing beside me. I could hear breathing. Slow, deep. Cold air brushed against my face. I stared forward. I didn't dare look to my right. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped. The footprints faded, but the smell of damp earth lingered. Marker 4. A woman stood in the center of the road wearing a white dress. Her head was lowered. Her long hair covered her face. She held a lantern that gave off a dim yellow glow. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded. When it stopped, she was gone. The lantern remained in the middle of the road. As I drove around it, the light suddenly went out. The cab temperature dropped sharply. The windshield fogged from the inside. Written across the glass were 3 words. "You are late." I wiped the glass. The message vanished. The radio turned on by itself. Children laughed through the speakers. Then they began counting. 3, 2, 1. The truck roof groaned. Something enormous landed on top. Metal bent inward. Heavy footsteps moved above my head. Each step made the windshield vibrate. Long scratching sounds dragged from front to back. I could barely keep control. At marker 1, everything stopped. Silence. I slowly looked in the rearview mirror. A towering figure stood in the truck bed. Its arms hung almost to its knees. Its skin looked gray like old ash. It wore a smile that stretched impossibly wide. Then it stepped backward into darkness. Gone. Marker Zero stood beside an empty intersection. The road ended abruptly. There was no town, no buildings, only a weathered wooden cross covered with faded flowers. A handwritten note was tied to it. It read, "Everyone who reached zero thought they escaped." Below it were dozens of names, some crossed out, some fresh. At the bottom was an empty line, as if waiting for another name. Mine. I didn't get out. I slammed the truck into reverse, turned around, and drove until sunrise. Back home, I climbed onto the truck to inspect the roof. There were 5 deep dents, each shaped like a human hand. The metal had been pushed inward as though by impossible weight. The next day, I took the truck to a repair shop. The mechanic looked at the roof and turned pale. He asked quietly, "Highway 47? I nodded. He shook his head. "I've seen this before." He refused to explain. He refused to repair it. He told me to leave. To this day, every November at exactly 2:30 a.m., my truck radio turns to static for 60 seconds. And through the noise, I hear the same whisper. "Next time, stop." Maybe it's just another internet story. Maybe exhaustion can make people see impossible things. Or maybe there are still places where the rules we trust simply don't apply. So if you're ever driving through the middle of nowhere, and the mile markers begin counting down towards zero, while the road around you grows unnaturally quiet, ask yourself one question. Would you keep driving? If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe, and comment Highway 47 if you would have kept driving no matter what. And if you have a strange experience from an empty road or forgotten highway, share it below. It might become the next story featured on the channel.